Hey guys, I wanted to talk today about um, the two guardians of our mind and our psyche, or the other name for the video is um, how our parents potentially impacting the ways how we are treating the world, both external and internal, and how that works through the perspective and framework of Jungian psychology. This is my personal hypothesis, but I think it might have been covered by someone else by now. I'm sure the reason I'm sharing this now is because I personally find this to be very insightful and meaningful, and I hope it might be the case for someone else as well. Just a quick, I guess, prerequisite for this discussion is in terms of definitions, Jungian psychology defines the structure of the mind in many specific details, but I think for this discussion, three components will be important. The first component, which is a core component, which is ego. And ego here, if you're not familiar, is not defined in the kind of in a common sense way, such as someone being egoistic or self-centered, but it's more defined as a platform or the area within the which the psychological events and observations are appearing and happening. Some of those observations in this in the ego might be happening because you're observing something in the external world, such as objects, sounds, physical feelings that you are acknowledging and noticing in your mind. So they do appear in the psyche. But there also might be things that are related to your internal world, things that don't, explicitly appear on the outside, such as your emotions, your feelings in the body, or some of the other deeper intuitions, for example, that you don't really observe in the external world. The second component that is important for our discussion is the persona. Persona, it's a very interesting topic, but for our conversation, it's important to think about this as a social mask that is used for the interaction with the external world. You can think about this as the main entrance door to your house. You probably, I mean, most of the time people want to keep the front of the house, the front door clean, welcoming, inviting, presentable, right? And this is what persona is. It is a front door of the ego. It's a front door of your psychological house that is interacting with the external kind of objective world out there. The final part of this of this trio, and the second part which plays against persona, is the anima or animus. For man it's anima, and for female it's animus. But this component, I will just call it anima for simplicity. Anima is a door to the internal world, and it reflects the way how you are treating the things that are happening or being observed in your internal world. So persona and anima are, from this perspective, relatively similar in their functions. The persona is acting as a front door of the house for people out there, and it reflects how you treat the external world, while the anima is reflecting the way how you look at your internal world and how you're treating the components that are appearing there. The other way to say this is, metaphorically speaking, ego is the house where all things are happening. Some of those things that happen in this house are conscious. Some of the things are not conscious. For example, you don't always know when the mice is running around your kitchen, or if you have, I don't know, a fly or bee flying in your living room, right? You are not always aware of this information, but it's still happening in your house nonetheless. Persona is the door to the external world, and the anima and the animus the door to the internal world of the house. And in more simple terms, persona is the way how you're treating the objective world on the outside, and the anima and animus is the way how you're treating your own personal internal world, where many things are unconscious. Some of them are conscious, many things are unconscious. And I think I have received, you can say, a certain perspective on this, which I found quite helpful. And this hypothesis, this insight, it goes like this. For guys, the persona part will imitate the way how the father of the child has treated the child. So not the external world, but how the father has been treating the child in its youth. So what I mean is, a guy will be acting with the external world in the same way as the father has been acting towards the child in the childhood. Or at least this will be the case for, you can call it the beginning part of life, perhaps from young adolescence to 30s, maybe even 40s, depending on the age. But it will definitely be present in the early part of life, in my opinion. So, for example, if the father of the child was very quiet, distanced from the child, and sometimes could have, explosions of the character towards the child, this will be reflected in the way how the child is treating the external world through the persona. So the child will also be very distanced from the world, generally speaking. He might not be interacting with other people much. He might not be actively involved with, well, actually, whatever activity, right? Again, just come back to the father example. And sometimes if he accumulates a lot of energy, he might also explode on the external world in the same way how his father could have exploded onto him. And this, I think, is a very interesting dynamic. Now, the anima, which is the internal world, will work in a very similar way, but instead of the father element, it will be the mother. Meaning, a guy will treat his own internal world, his emotions and his feelings, in the same way as his mother has been treating him. So, for example, if the mother was very attentive, perhaps overly attentive, and she was spending a lot of time taking care of a young boy's emotions and feelings and his needs, then he will be using the same attitude, so to speak, towards his own internal world in the future. So he will treat his own emotions and feelings in the same way. That's where I think the mommy's boy term might be coming from, right? So this pattern of treating your own internal way, almost almost using a mother figure as an example of care, and how care, especially care to your own self, should be exercised. That's how it will ultimately be developing. Now, for girls, it will work in the same way, with the difference that the things will be mirrored. Meaning, for girls, the persona part, that way how they're going to be treating their own external world, people out there, events, their friends, relationships, it will mimic the way how the mother has been treating the girl. So, for example, if the mother's attitude towards the girl in her childhood was very intellectual and very practical, then it's very likely that the girl will be treating the external world in the same way, meaning she will see it and act through the prism of intellect and practicality. Now, the way how a girl will treat her own internal world, as you might have guessed by now, is going to be mimicking the way how the father has been treating the girl. So, for example, if he's been treating her very strictly, if there wasn't not much time spent, invested into discussing or observing relationships, she will not probably be doing this herself either. Perhaps to her detriment, perhaps not. It's difficult to say, right? But the fact is, it's gonna be mimicking this behavior. Now, do I think this pattern develops and changes over time? I certainly think so. I think it does change as we progress. I think both persona and anima, meaning the parts of us that open to the external world and to the internal world, they change as we mature and as we progress and as we become more conscious of the way how we think and how we act. In the perfect world, the person is, as I expect, they should probably be, quote unquote, they should grow up and ultimately find a way of growing up to the level where they can treat their parents as equals, not in a way where they are above their parents and they argue with them or they attack them, but in a way where they understand that those are ultimately just regular people who have temporarily been bearing the projection of the perfect mother and the perfect father. And as basically when this projection ultimately changes, and when the projection is being taken off the biological father and biological mother, I believe this is one of the key transitional phases for people to come to the place where they feel free to treat the external and the internal world in the way how they actually see fit and find their own approach. And this is not going to be easy, because I mean, even though just mirroring the patterns of your parents might not seem like the most ideal solution, at the very least it provides you with the basis of how to act, right? It gives you something. When you decide to grow up, and when you decide to take those projections off, and when you decide to try to operate with your persona and anima, if you try to establish your own personal connection with them, this is going to be a very long-term game with finding ways of how you can be interacting with the external world, where you will probably not know things for sure for a long time, and the same with the internal world. So it's a pretty difficult thing to do, and arguably I think that's might be the reason why people might be opting into not trying to grow up, because it just might be easier to blame, even though it might be unconscious, it might be easier to blame the patterns of the parents instead of entering into the unknown world where you have no rule, no guidance, and no understanding how to survive and how to be most optimal self on the outside and with your inside world. I do think that this hypothesis seems quite plausible. I think for people who are relatively young, as I said, from probably young adolescents to maybe early mid 30s, I think it might make sense. But personally, also, I wanted to say that I found this very helpful to understand and to maybe, have a high level perspective on how I interact with the world externally and internally. Because you can often find some bits and pieces. Sometimes people from the outside tell you how you seem to them, how you seem to act, but you always have, a couple of puzzles, but you don't exactly put this puzzle together. And the same with the internal world, which might be even more difficult because nobody is actually there to tell you how you're acting with it. Like, you're the only person who knows, probably, even though it's also might be difficult, who knows how you're treating your own internal world. And it also might be difficult to understand what is the lens through which you are looking at it. So I do hope that this perspective might be helpful. If you find that this resonates with you, or you have any thoughts, I'd be curious to know what you think.